UB Bulls fans, it's that time once again for Bullseye Nation, the latest installment of the post-game podcast for the University of Buffalo Bulls. And coming up on this one today, we're going to hear from Norm Rodriguez. We're going to have another surprise for you as well. We're going to hear from Brad Riter on this loss to Central Michigan, 31-27. So stick around for that and a whole lot more coming up in this edition of Bullseye Nation, and it starts right now. Hello once again, everybody. I am John Kruba. This is Bullseye Nation, talking about a heartbreaking, gut-wrenching 31-27 defeat at the hands of the Central Michigan Chippewas and this UB football program, and really all the University of Buffalo sports mean the world to me. I remember my dad used to take me to games even when I was 4 or 5 years old, and this team really does mean a lot to me. So I've watched a lot of UB football over the years, and there's no sugarcoating this. This loss right here, when you were up 24-7 heading into the halftime locker room against a Central Michigan team that had a star quarterback, running back, but that's really all they had, coming in with a very disappointing 3-6 record. There's no way to understate this or overstate this. This was a brutal loss. To lose this game now basically finishes your chances of winning the MAC East. UB technically could still do so, but they're going to need a miracle now because UB has to win out and Ohio has to lose out. Now, I do think Ohio's going to lose next week against Ball State, who I think is an underrated dark horse in the MAC West, but I think they'll get it together for their home finale, find a way to win and clinch the division. One good thing for the UB Bulls, though, they can still lock up bowl eligibility next week. They're going to take on a 1-9 Akron Zips team that I think hands down is the worst, not only in the MAC East, but in the entire conference. But then again, it shouldn't have been real hard tonight either. You were taking on a 3-6 Central Michigan Chippewa team that really only had a quarterback who's basically more of a running back, and boy, did he put that on display. You got to give credit where credit is due. Bert Emanuel Jr., he was outstanding tonight, and UB let him run circles all over him in the second half. And it looked like the Bulls were going to be on their way to an easy night. In the first half, it was UB that was running right down Central Michigan's throat. But whatever adjustments the Chippewas made in the second half, give them credit because it worked. It flipped the script, and it turned that game on its ear. You're going to hear Norm in a little bit later on this podcast, and he made a really good point as we were talking during the game. And the one thing was that Central Michigan always had a response. You look at UB, their first touchdown drive, up 7-0, perfect, beautiful. What happens? They get up a 60-yard kickoff return, and Central Michigan uses that to take it down the field and answer and tie the game at 7. What happens in the second half after Alex McNulty, who was without a doubt the best offensive player on the field tonight for the Bulls? He's the kicker. He nailed a 54-yard field goal. That's right, 54-yard field goal to put the Bulls up 24-7 at halftime. What happens when the second half starts? Oh, the Chippewas just take the ball, and again, a massive run, give up the long touchdown, and once again, it's right back to a 2-possession game. What we saw from UB in this second half is a lot of what we saw early in the season. They were making mistakes. They were shooting themselves in the foot, and you can't do that when you're playing a division rival. And Central Michigan, you give them credit. They took advantage. Now for the UB Bulls, it's funny. We have 2 games left in the regular season before we hit bowl season. And quite frankly, I'm sitting here kind of wondering what exactly to feel about this team. Because, when they started 0-3, we thought, well, they're not that bad, especially the way they played against Holy Cross. So you figured it was a mirage. And then the Bulls went out and proved everybody right by winning 4 in a row to start 4-0 in the MAC. After losing to Ohio, I could see it because Ohio's a really good team. Obviously, they've only lost once in the conference so far this year. So Ohio is a very, very good football team. Nothing wrong with losing to a good team like that. But then watching this second half meltdown against Central Michigan, who is not a very good team. I'm sorry, they're not. Like Bill Parcells used to say, you are what your record says you are. And Central Michigan was 3-6. And to not be able to come away with the victory, blowing a 3-score lead and ending up losing this game, now it's starting to look like that 4-0 MAC start, that may have been the mirage, not the 0-3 start. And another thing, as far as Coach Lindquist goes, Coach Mo, he's got some answering to do as well. He made some questionable play calls coming down the stretch, especially on that late drive when UB got it all the way down close to the red zone, a 3rd down and 2 with inside 2 minutes left to go in the game. And he runs the ball a couple of times. And the last one, they almost telegraphed it for the defense. And the Chippewas were right there to stuff it. Over the last few weeks, I've given Coach Lindquist credit, and I think he's deserved it for the growth that we've seen, the way he's been able to get his team to battle back in some of these games. But what we saw tonight, remember when Lance Leipold first took over as Bulls head coach? And you remember back to the MAC championship game when they lost to Northern Illinois after having that big lead in the 4th quarter. And Leipold really struggled a couple of times as far as getting his team together to clean it up when things were going wrong. And Leipold, to his credit, finally was able to figure it out and led UB to 2 bowl wins, which were some of the biggest in program history once he finally got that straightened out. I believe Lindquist is struggling with the exact same thing. When you watch him on the sidelines in the second half of that game tonight against Central Michigan, it looked like he had no answers whatsoever. It was clear the situation was getting out of control. And for somebody who was praised for being a big-time defensive proponent coming from the Dallas Cowboys, we heard his defensive pedigree. That did not display itself tonight because in the biggest moments, this defense could not figure out a way to stop the Chippewas, and they certainly couldn't stop Emmanuel. He was running all over them in that second half. So for the Buffalo Bulls, they are now going to have to look at themselves in the mirror and really try to regroup. They had 2 big games on the road, and they come away 0-2 on it. Now, the good news, like I said, last 2 games are at home. They're playing an Akron team that is absolutely terrible. And then you finish it off at home against Kent State, who did beat Bowling Green earlier 40-6. So if there is a positive that you could take away from this for the UB Bulls, one thing that you got to say is don't mess around when you have a big lead. When you are in the first half and you are controlling the game, you got to continue to pound it on the other team. You cannot let up. And unfortunately, the UB Bulls let up tonight, and it came back to bite them as they ultimately fell hard 31-27 to the Central Michigan Chippewas. So for the UB Bulls, they now drop to 5-5 on the season, now 4-2 in the MAC. And so now for UB, they're going to have to look to get themselves back on the winning track, which we remember the last time UB was at home, a memorable comeback win against Toledo. And so let's see if UB can keep that magic going next week against the Akron Zips. So let's get to the stats of the game, which we always like to do here on the official podcast for UB Bulls and UB Bulls football. And in this game, it was a 31-27 win for the Chippewas. First down to the game, 25-18 for the UB Bulls. UB went 9 of 20 on 3rd down. Central Michigan went 3 of 9. Meanwhile, for UB, 3 of 5 on 4th. Although couldn't convert when they really needed to. late in the game. Meanwhile, Central Michigan was 0 of 1. Total yards in the game was actually pretty even. UB did do their job in terms of racking up the yards against the Chippewas defense. 431 total yards for UB, 420 for Central Michigan. Passing on the game, 191 for the Bulls, 117 for the Chippewas. Rushing, big difference in favor of the Chippewas, 303 compared to 240 for the Bulls. Penalties, 3 of 15 for Central Michigan. Here again is where UB hurt themselves. 6 penalty flags tonight for 64 yards. So again, they had really cleaned up the discipline, but not tonight. And time of possession, it was 21 minutes, 33 seconds for Central Michigan, 38-27 for the Bulls, but ultimately does not matter as they fall 31-27. Turnovers in the game, 1 apiece. And the funny thing about this, and this was kind of the story of what a wacky game this was, that UB threw an interception, but on the very next play, Central Michigan coughed up the ball and UB took it right back again. And that was another turning point in the game. UB had it with the game tied at 24, and they forced that big-time fumble from Emmanuel. They jump on top of it. Damian Jackson did. And they only moved the ball 2 yards from the Central Michigan 38. And thankfully, McNulty, who give this kid an NFL contract, hits a 54-yarder, hits another long one, and then he hits one there to give them the lead 27-24. But the fact that UB wasn't able to turn that into a touchdown, that opened the door for Central Michigan. And on that next offensive series, I believe that gave the Chippewas the momentum they needed with a lot of quarterback-designed runs, took it down the field, and ultimately got the 31-27 lead that they would not relinquish. And that, again, is another sign of where this game turned for the Central Michigan victory. So for UB, they now come home for their last 2 games of the regular season, 1 win away from bowl eligibility. But boy, they're going to have a lot of soul searching to do after this one, that's for sure. So now while we have a moment, let's take a look and listen to the offensive plays of the game right here on Bullseye Nation. And as always, yours truly, behind the mic. UB with it now, 1st and goal to go from the Central Michigan 2-yard line. As looking for the first point of the game, clock continues to roll here, opening quarter, no score with 8 minutes left. They're going to go out of the pistol set, 1 running back to the left, 2 receivers spread out to the right, UB down the field, left to right. The snap, handoff goes right up the middle, fighting his way forward, and he is going to have enough on the second effort to get across the goal line for a touchdown for UB. Mike Washington, he's been doing this all season long, just powers his way, battering ram across that goal line, and UB in this big divisional matchup strikes first. UB 6, Central Michigan, no score. On this 1st down and 10 for the Bulls, we have 9:40 to go in the first half, tied at 7 apiece. UB driving down the field south to north end zone, right to left. They're going to work out of the pistol set, running back off the left shoulder, 1 receiver right side of the line. 4 down linemen for the Chippewas, while on the right hash of the Central Michigan 25-yard line. The snap, handoff, Cook gets the carry, and there he goes, bursting through the hole. Straight up the gut, he's at the 15, he's at the 10, he is going to stroll on into the end zone. Touchdown Bulls! Ron Cook with the 25-yard scamper, and just like that, the UB Bulls turn on the afterburners, use the running game to take their second lead of the evening. UB 13, Central Michigan 7. 7:03 to go first half. UB with a 14-7 edge. UB again driving on the left hash of the Central Michigan 30-yard line. Bulls go with two receivers spread out right side of the formation, one wide to the left. 4-3 defense again for the Chippewas. Awaiting the snap, handoff straight up the middle. There goes Henderson. He takes off up the middle. Oh, what a burst. He's at the 20, 15, and it looks like he's going to take it all the way. He does, into the end zone. Touchdown Bull. Oh, Jay Henderson. Shades of what we just saw on the last drive from Ron Cook. That was almost an exact carbon copy as he went off right tackle, took it right through the A-gap, down the field 30 yards, and UB starting to pull away. Now UB taking a commanding 20-7 lead over the Chippewas late in the first half. And those were your offensive plays of the game for the UB Bulls. And again, they continue to be Jekyll and Hyde all season as they looked great in the first half. They were dreadful in the second half and ultimately fell 31-27 at the hands of the Central Michigan Chippewas. Now let's find out what Brad Riter thinks, one of the analysts for the UB Bulls on WWKB 1520. Let's get his thoughts in this interview on what he thought about the game and the unfortunate 31-27 result. And it was a pretty deflating loss, Brett. I mean, you're up 24-7 at halftime. Things are sitting pretty. Offense is rolling. And then the second half starts. And I think the way to start this off is what happened? What did you see out there in the second half?
I host the halftime show, and I'm usually really cautious about assuming that the second half will be a repeat of the first half. We've all seen what football is. We've all seen what MAC football is. We've all seen what midweek, nighttime MAC football is, and things get crazy. And yesterday I decided that I didn't care about being safe with the whole thing because of the effectiveness of the ground game in the first half. And that's the kind of thing that's in theory repeatable. You look at the situation, the Bulls would run for whatever it was, 218 yards in the first half, using 3 running backs and a quarterback. And it was working with all of them. They're averaging, 4.5, 5 yards a carry, just moving the ball, doing everything they wanted. And it seemed to me that with a 17-point lead, even if, and I think I said this, worst case scenario, they come out, they score a touchdown on the first drive. You're still up 10. You're still in a position where running the football is the best thing for you, and they've shown no ability to effectively stop them. One of the things I didn't account for was like Washington getting hurt, Ron Cook getting hurt, and essentially the Bulls losing 2 of the guys who were making the ground game successful. I also didn't know that Central Michigan was going to discover a phenomenon like they did in Bert Emanuel Jr. yesterday, who ended up just going off like nothing I've ever seen in the second half of the game. So, I'm not going to do that next time. When the first half looks one way, I'm going to remember that I'm watching MAC football and things can change pretty quickly in a league where teams are so evenly matched. I mean, this was a pick'em game going into it. So if the one team wins by 17 in the first half, Vegas is assuming the other team wins by 17-ish in the second half, and Vegas is right a lot. So, what happened? I don't know. The Bulls couldn't stop one play. It was not super creative offense. It was lining up a safety at halfback, using him as a blocking back, pretending you're in option, but you're not, because the only thing Emmanuel was doing was running the ball, and it was either left or right, and that was it. And the Bulls had no answer.
And, I think the other concerning part, Brad, is not only the injuries, but also, I think what we saw in the second half were some of the ugly things that we saw during their own 3 start. I think we started to see the mistakes, got penalized a little bit more. And I think what that did was it allowed Central Michigan back into the game. And, it's interesting now because we have 2 weeks left to go in the regular season. And I'm kind of going back to how do we really feel about this football team right now? I mean, they're only 1 win away from bowl eligibility, which they should be able to get done over the course of the next 2 weeks. But remember, this team, they started 0-3, but then they went 4-0 in the MAC. You lose to Ohio last week, you can understand that. Ohio is a very good team. But now after losing this game the way they lost it, you're almost left wondering, is the 0-3 start a mirage, or maybe the 4-0 start in the MAC? Was that the mirage?
Yeah, I think, and I kind of landed on this last night. I think the 5-5 is the truth. It's how you get there. It's a little streaky, whatever, but it's a team that's got some things I really like and some things I really don't like. And it adds up to a good half here and a bad half here and a winning streak here and a losing streak there. And now we're sitting here 10 games in and you're talking about a 500 team. And that's what we're looking at. That's where they deserve to be, it seems. They've got some things that work really well. They've got some real problems. And sometimes it goes your way and sometimes it doesn't. So I think what we're looking at is a pretty accurate, the 5-5 record is a pretty accurate description of what this team is right now. And, a 6-win team can go to a bowl. Is UB going to go to a bowl with 6 wins? I don't think so. 6 wins, including a loss to an FCS team. That's not a great resume. If they win 2 more games, they'll have 7 wins. They'll deserve a bowl. They'll go to a bowl. If they lose the next 2, they won't deserve a bowl. They won't go to a bowl. And if they go 1-1, I don't know if they deserve one, and I don't know if they go to one. So I think when all is said and done, it works out pretty fairly and pretty reasonably here in Mo Linguist's second year with the Bulls.
Yeah, and Brad, you kind of already touched on a point that I wanted to get to, but one of the things as far as the second half play calling, it wasn't real creative. You're right. And it seemed like it was pretty conservative, especially I want to go to that final drive where UB was driving the ball down the field, chance to take the lead. They have a 3rd down and 2 plays to pick up 2 yards, could not do it. Were you surprised at all that, especially with the injuries, that they went to the ground game so much? It was almost kind of like what we saw the Packers do against the Bills a couple of weeks ago on Sunday Night Football, where they went with the running game and it was melting the clock on them. Were you surprised in particular they didn't go to the air more in that situation?
No, not necessarily. I mean, this team, I came out of last week's game at Ohio mad that they forgot that they're a team that's ground-based, that everything that they do really works off of that. They've got some studs in the passing game, but in order to make that work, the ground game has to be first and foremost for this Bulls team, for them to have success. It's how they won 5 straight. That's how they started 4-0 in the MAC. So it's not surprising. And the fact, I don't remember how much time was left on the clock when they got the ball back down 4 with, it was a few minutes. It was Scott Wilson turned around to me and basically said, don't forget there's still time to run. And I thought the same thing, because if this Bulls team is not designed to be a, wing it down the field in 2.5 minutes and go score the winning touchdown, but they are designed to eat 4.5 minutes and move the ball down the field and score a touchdown. That is how it works. As it turns out, the big pass to Keon Williams was one of the biggest plays of the drive. Well, as it turns out, it doesn't matter because they didn't score. But there was enough of the passing game to complement the ground game on that drive. The biggest surprise to me, or the most frustrating thing to me on the final drive, was the Bulls taking a timeout to decide to run the ball into the middle of the line on 4th and 1, as opposed to getting up there and snapping it. Because had they not done that, they would have had their 3 timeouts left. They could have stopped them and forced another opportunity. Instead, you take away the second opportunity by wasting the timeout, then you fail to get it, and now you're dead. And I don't even know what Central Michigan was doing, because if I'm watching that team, or watching, from their perspective, thinking about Central Michigan, why were they even attempting to move the ball on that final drive? They put their quarterback in harm's way. They put the ball back in play to where the Bulls could have taken it away. I thought that was insane. And almost, very easily could have allowed the Bulls another opportunity when it was really just kneel down time. So that was weird. Um, but as far as play calling in the second half, there's really only one thing on the offensive side of the ball that frustrates me tremendously still, 12 hours removed from the game. And that was the decision to go for it on the first drive of the second half.
Yeah.
I didn't understand how the benefits made it worth the risk. In a game that you owned the first half, and then you give up a 75-yard touchdown on the first play, and now you go, 3 plays, you gain 7 yards. You're at your own 37 or something. Let's say you pick up the first down. Well, now it's 1st and 10 at your own 40. You're up 10. What's the difference? What are we doing? It's not as though, pick up this 3 yards and now we're in prime position to score a touchdown. Pick up these 3 yards. You're in 1st and 10 with 60 yards to go before you score. So I just didn't understand in the flow of the game what the idea was there. It just didn't make sense. I appreciate we're going to be aggressive. We're going to take this game. This is ours. But that was not the moment for it at all. And this is not hindsight. This is at the time. Like, what are you doing? Why? Even if you get it, who cares? So I don't know. And I think what they did there, even though Central didn't score immediately off of that turnover on downs, it still set up the field position game to where they had to get the goal line stop, which I would contend there was a touchdown scored that was reviewed and somehow didn't count. But I mean, right there, you turn your 17-point lead into a 3-point lead. We're only 3 minutes into the half. So I didn't understand that, and I don't think they ever recovered from it.
Yeah, no, and it's you took the words right out of my mouth as far as flipping the field position. That's the damaging impact that had. I think the game management issues in the second half, I think, reared its ugly head. It almost, Brad, kind of reminds me when Lance Leipold started his tenure as head coach of this team. We saw them in the MAC championship game against Northern Illinois, had the lead, couldn't hold on to it. You saw that they had that bad loss against Kent State a couple of years ago where they had a big lead. And the concern was it looked at times like Coach Leipold had a hard time being able to get his team collected when things started to go south. And I would say outside of the second half against Toledo this year, where he gets credit for pulling it together, it does seem like at times watching him on the sideline, when that game really started to go south, Coach Mo seemed to have a difficult time trying to get his team together because as it was going south, for a while, it looked like they had no answers. I don't know. Did you notice something like that?
I don't spend a lot of time staring at the sideline, but your story checks out with the results of the game. So I mean, it to me it comes down to the fact that they were running one play and the Bulls couldn't solve that one play, and I wonder if Emmanuel had started his, terrorizing of the Bulls in the second quarter, would things have been different if they had halftime to sit there and say, what are we going to do about this? But in the moment, it just got away from them. And it was a matter of solving one problem, and that is tackling a quarterback. They weren't running anything creative. It was Pop Warner football. It was snap the ball to a quarterback and it's student body left, student body right. That's it. That's all they did. And the Bulls didn't have a solution for that. And you could see individual players step up and at times, Dolak is a tackling machine. I thought Patterson had his moments in yesterday's game too, but it was just, I don't know. The game just, it went away and no, they didn't have a solution. So I don't know who you blame, or that's the way things go sometimes. But once the momentum got going in the other direction, the Bulls just lost the confidence they needed to make this thing happen. And even with all that, they still did wind up in a spot where if they pick up a yard, I think they've got a decent chance to throw up a pass to one of their big receivers, particularly Justin Marshall. I would think would be your guy down in the red zone, and they could have walked out of there with what I would have felt like was a stolen win. But they were still in it to do it. So I think it's Mac. I think I think it's a 5-5 type of football team, and this is how you get there. We have half the weeks we get to tell happy stories, and half the weeks are this.
Yeah, and I think the thing for CMU, for Central Michigan, is they did sort of give the Bulls a taste of their own medicine in the second half. They dominated the ground game, much the same way UB did in the first half. But, as I'm thinking about it, watching the second half again, I can't help but wonder, did Central Michigan maybe see what Ohio did? They obviously had a ton of yards on the ground. What they were able to do against UB the week before, and say, hey, you know what? This might be a game plan to use against this defense, because whatever halftime adjustments Central Michigan made, they seem to work out really well for the Chippewas, Brad.
Well, it seems there were two adjustments that were made. One was on the offensive side of the ball, where there were no other options. They didn't have anybody who could throw the ball or catch the ball or run the ball. And then they found a guy who could run the ball, and they said, let's keep doing that. I was just talking yesterday about I play against my 6-year-old in Madden. And when we first started, he uses the Bills. He does this play action pass, and he throws deep down the left sideline to Diggs. And the way Madden is set up, I can't just quickly say double team Diggs and we'll be fine. I can't do that with the controller. So I always have to highlight a guy and drag him over there and try to use him and cover. And eventually I've come up with ways to do it. It used to be that he would either win or compete, and now I crush him because he runs the same play every day. And it's embarrassing. And I tell him, you can't just keep running the same play, because that's not going to work. I'm not allowed to let him see the second half of this game, because then I can never tell him that again. They ran one play for the entire half, and it was successful. So that's their offensive adjustment was, let's just snap it to this guy and see what happens. It was borderline giving up on offense, and it worked tremendously. And then the defensive side of the ball, I think the adjustment that was made was, look, they're not interested in passing the ball. They weren't interested in passing the ball in the first half, and now they've got a 17-point lead. So let's just pretend that they don't know how to throw, and we'll deal with it if they make a couple plays downfield. And that's all they did, was made a couple plays downfield, but they sold out to stop the run, and it worked. So, it's pretty simple what went on. The Bulls showed a commitment to the run. At halftime, the Chips decided, okay, let's end that, force them to pass it over the top of us. And that was successful. And then just snapping the ball to a really talented freshman and letting him run wild worked out. And, if this game is a few minutes longer or a couple plays go a different way, the Bulls could have pulled it off. But, when they took the lead, when McNulty hit the 54-yard field goal to give the Bulls whatever it was, 27-24 point lead, or 27-24 lead, a 3-point lead. We were saying right then, all right, that's fine. But if you allow a touchdown, this game's over. And they allowed the same drive to happen again, and it went in the end zone again. And here we are talking about a loss again.
It's just I guess it's amazing, Brad, when it is just that same play, same player. You'd think you'd eventually be able to catch on and stop it, and they just never were able to. I don't know exactly what happened, why exactly that was the case, but I mean, Emmanuel was just killing them all second half long.
What kind of numbers did he wind up with? Did he hit 300 rushing? I mean, it was ridiculous. I'm checking right now. 24 carries for 306 yards, net of 293, but 3 touchdowns, including an 87-yarder. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what you do with that. I don't know. I don't even know how to talk about it. I started the post-game show with Bob Gaughan yesterday by saying, I'm sorry, I'm not here anymore. I can't talk. But here I am several hours later, ready to at least discuss it a little bit. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't have answers. They didn't have answers. I'm just the radio guy. I definitely don't have the answers.
Hey, you know what? I think that makes 2 of us. That's why I just asked the question. We were watching it. It's almost like what John Sterling would say for the Yankees sometimes. I don't believe it, and I'm seeing it. Sometimes it really just is the case. I think if there's a couple positives to take even from a loss like this. Alex McNulty was awesome again. So hitting a 54-yard field goal. I mean, get this guy an NFL contract. I mean, he has been unbelievable. And I think the learning that you can take from this is your next 2 weeks. Next week, you're at home against Akron, who I think is probably the worst team, at least record-wise, in the MAC. They're 1-9. But if you get a big lead, don't mess around. You get the big lead, you got to continue. You don't pick your foot up off a poisonous snake, as Harry Neal would say. You got to stay on these teams when they get these big leads. You can't let them back into the game. And unfortunately, UB fell victim to that.
It's tough to not be comfortable when you do what the Bulls did in the first half. It's tough to go in at halftime and think there's a chance you could lose. It didn't feel like there was a chance. Again, that's okay for me as a broadcaster to think this one's over. It's not okay for the team to think it. And then you give them a little bit of life with that first play, a 75-yard touchdown run on the first play of the half. You're like, oh, I think things have changed. And then to give them that short field and mess with field position and then have an inability to stop one play. It just, I don't know that it's killer instinct. I think they got out coached certainly at the half, and then couldn't find a way to stop one guy. I don't know how many times I could say it, or it just I don't know. Tackle that man. Here comes the snap. No matter what they're doing, no matter who's moving around, no matter where the extra tight ends are lined up.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on them. That's the direction they're about to run.
Yeah.
Make a play. And I don't know. I don't know.
Just a couple more things here, Brad. Just first, obviously you go on the road with the team, following the team, and how much fun has Alex McNulty been to watch? I mean, hitting 54-yard field goals. Boys, I mean, it literally sounds and seems like he's an automatic every time they put him out there. For the most part, he has been outstanding this season. What's it been like to watch him up close, especially?
What's cool with him is that he was, he was adequate. He was fine. And there was somewhere late in the year when he lined up and they were going for a 55-yard field goal, let's say. And he had never hit anything like that. We had no reason to believe that this was a wise decision at this point in time. This is last year. And he went out and drilled it, like just crushed it. And I couldn't believe that the confidence that Mo Lingua showed in him had been rewarded. And ever since then, I've been doing these games since 2008. It's the first time this year is the first time that it has felt as though the kicker is a weapon on the team, that you can get yourself into a position 50-ish and you're good. I mean, they've had kickers who've been consistent at hitting short field goals, making their extra points.
Right.
But it's never been hey, we've got one of these guys with a big leg, so if we can get in the 50-yard range, we've got a real shot at 3 points here. And having that is it gives you a real good comfort level on the offensive side of the ball, that even if things aren't going perfectly well, you've got a chance to score from a decent distance. So, it happened again yesterday. The problem yesterday is when that field goal was hit, we knew we were in a game where field goals weren't going to work because they had no ability to stop this other guy. So they kick the field goal, they take the lead. They come right back down. They score a touchdown. The Bulls never score again. So, he's been fun. Real nice kid, too. I like him a lot. We wind up on the bus with him a lot where he's just kind of hanging out, in our area on these trips. And he's a real nice guy, real good dude. And it's a cool story to have seen his development over the course of his career here at UB.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and one more thing as far as on Central Michigan side, I think the one thing UB should be kicking themselves about on top of everything and blowing a 17-point lead. It seemed like there were a few times when Central Michigan needed a response, and it was absolutely critical. They seemed to get it, meaning UB goes down the field, they score the opening touchdown. What happens right after that? 60-yard kickoff return sets up that game-tying touchdown drive. Yeah. Right at the half, UB gets the field goal to go up 17, feeling really good about themselves. What happens on the first drive of the second half? Central Michigan right down the field and scores. And I think the fact that every time they really, really needed a response and they got it, that's what allowed Central Michigan to stay in the game till they were able to really tie it and take control.
In the Bulls' defense, they did that once too, which was interception followed by forced fumble on the next play to give the ball back to them. I think, and this kind of goes back to what I said right at the beginning. I think we're watching a 500. In fact, I know we're watching a 500 team. So half the stuff's good and half the stuff's bad, and it all adds up to being okay. You've got 2 games left here to make yourself better than okay and get yourself to a bowl game. And there's still an outside shot at Detroit if they were to win both and Ohio were to lose both. I don't think Ohio's losing both. No. But crazier things have happened in the MAC. It's not nuts to see. Most years a 2-loss team winds up in Detroit. So if you can just hang out and remain a 2-loss team and let Ohio somehow become a 3-loss team, there's still a shot at that. So, as of right now, I'm just stuck on. I've been watching a 500 team, so half the stuff we like and half the stuff we don't. And let's see what happens over the next 2 games to see what type of season this really is.
And last thing here, and it's funny, Paul, a couple weeks ago when he was on this podcast, he mentioned as far as how crazy, kind of what you were saying, reiterating it. The MAC is, MACtion, it's crazy. A lot of weird things tend to happen. And UB, for the first 4 games of MAC play, was able to avoid, getting tripped up. Well, tonight they fell victim to that. And now looking ahead, again, bowl eligibility still on the line, still a ton to play for. And now you got to shake this off. You got 2 games at home to close out the season. You're taking on Akron next week. If you're Coach Lindquist, what are you telling your guys, to get them fired up for that game? I'm sure they're probably pretty disappointed with what happened last night. But what are you telling them, and what do you think some of the biggest keys to beating Akron and Kent State are going to be?
Well, I think they need to remember who they are. Last week's loss at Ohio, I don't know what led to them trying to become an entirely different offensive team going into that game against the Bobcats. I kind of do. I know that they hadn't been good against the pass. And if you just look at numbers, you'd say, all right, well, this is a team we could throw on, except that's not the kind of team you are. And the kind of team they are and the kind of team they should be was on perfect display in the first half yesterday. So go back, establish that. You should beat Akron by 3 scores. This should not be a reasonable matchup for the Bulls. As crazy as MACtion is, you shouldn't drop this game to Akron. I've seen crazier things, but they should win that game. And again, I'm allowed to look ahead. They're not. The question is, can you beat Kent State to go to a bowl game? Because that's really what it's probably going to come down to. Like I said, Detroit could come back into play. But the reality is, if you're UB, you're in the MAC, you're not a lock in any way to go to a bowl game, especially with 6 wins, when one of your wins is against, one of your losses is against an FCS team.
Holy cross.
So you're in no position to assume that bowl eligibility means going to a bowl. So go get the job done against Akron. That's blocking and tackling and just beating an inferior football team. The Bulls are better than Akron. So go do that. And then the season continuing hinges on what you're able to do at home against Kent State.
Absolutely. And so UB here's hoping, good thing they play really well at home. Hey, last time they were at UB Stadium, they came back. They basically did the same thing Central Michigan did to them last night. Came back and got a huge win against Toledo, which right now is the win of the season. That maybe the one against Miami of Ohio. So they seem to play well there.
Yeah, 17 points. And 17 happened again last night. So we act like it's crazy that we saw it. We just saw it 2 weeks ago. We just liked it better because the right team won. So yeah, here we are, 5-5, MACtion.
Absolutely. Brad, thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it. Good stuff. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon. And hopefully, actually, we'll be talking about the UB Bulls being bowl eligible and going for that big victory against Kent State. I'm sick and tired of talking about losses.
Yes, I will. I'll come on again to talk about a win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brad, thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks, Sean.
As always, great thoughts from Brad Riter on this UB's loss 31-27 to Central Michigan. And now it's that time again. Let's bring on our featured analyst, Norm Rodriguez, and he certainly had no shortage of words on what his feelings were about this game tonight. As always, gives a lot of good insight, and we hope you enjoy this part of it, as here is Norm's thoughts on this 31-27 defeat to the Chippewas. And so now, once again, it's time for the segment that I know, based on feedback from last week, a lot of people enjoy, and that's to bring in our analyst, Norm Rodriguez, to break down this game. And Norm, we're going to start off. We know you bring the energy. I said in my open that it was, kind of hard to feel a lot of energy after this deflating loss to a team that's been struggling in Central Michigan, especially the way that they lost it. Well, like I said, I know you can bring the energy, but I think we're going to start off by saying that, UB has some good wins so far this season, but this has to be a bad loss. I mean, what happened?
Well, I couldn't have said it any better. With the deflating, it could have been more deflated than Tom Brady's footballs that he uses, whether he's a pat or a buck. But the first half, they looked like gods. They were phenomenal. 2 rush touchdowns, and the gaps were split open like the Red Sea. But then the second half was a different story. And it was Bert Emanuel Jr., the son of former wide receiver Bert Emanuel Sr. He had over 170 rush yards in the third quarter alone, 75 and 87-yard touchdown rushes. And they were like the Bills versus the Jets. They were lackadaisical. They were on cruise control for the second half. And all I know is even a freshman could have passed that road test. That's how pathetic the second half was.
Norm, you brought the energy with that answer. That's what we wanted. I'm glad to get some Normisms out of you. Because that was deflate. I mean, yeah, I think you hit it also perfectly. I mean, you couldn't have asked to be in a better position at half. You're up 24-7. The running game, your team was looking dynamic as far as the UB Bulls go. Looked like they had Central Michigan right on the ropes, ready for the haymaker. And then, you know what? You pointed it out. So I'm going to give you credit, my friend. When they gave up that long touchdown run to start the second half, you texted me saying, not a good way to start the second half. At that point, I still was pretty confident, but you could kind of see the wheels turning. And boy, not only did the wheels turn, they came off completely, Norm.
Yeah, they came off completely. Even the bus going 50 miles an hour and over with Keanu Reeves in it, the wheels were still intact for that. But yet UB couldn't hold on versus Central Michigan, who were 2-6, if not 3-6 on the season going into the game. And I think they took a look at their record and just sat on the lawn chair, sipped on some iced tea, and sang Kumbaya on the campfire. They were way too relaxed in the second half.
They absolutely were. They were too easy. And, I want to bring up something. I think what makes this loss worse, because even though, yes, UB probably is still going to become bowl eligible, 2 home games left against teams they really should be. And the key word again is should, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But I think the reason this is so deflating, not only who it was against and how it happened, but you started to see tendencies of what we saw in the first half of the season when they started 0-3. You started seeing the mistakes. You started seeing the offense get stuffed on almost every attempt. Snyder did not appear to be on, especially in that second half. And, everyone was talking when they got up to that 4-0 start in the MAC, they were thinking they're undefeated. That 0-3 start was a mirage. Well, after watching the last 2, now Ohio's a good team, so we can at least understand that one. But after watching this one tonight, you can't help but wonder, was the 0-3 a mirage, or was the 4-0 in the MAC to start off a mirage?
Personally, I would think it would possibly be the MAC record, because besides that, in the 5-game winning streak, it looked like they were going to sweep the rest of the regular season, go 8-4, go into a bowl game. But now it's starting to look like that adventure of Abbott and Costello when they jump into that oasis, quote unquote, but it turns out to be a mouthful of sand.
Yeah. Loving it. You know what, Norm, we've needed you to bring your A game, and so far you have, man. That's a good one too. I think another red flag in this game, and I remember talking to Paul about this a few weeks ago on the post game podcast, was one thing we started to give Coach Lindquist more credit for was he started to be more aggressive. You started to see him almost growing as a head coach. What we watched, especially on that final drive when they were driving it down the field, they had 2 plays to pick up 2 yards and made 2 very conservative, questionable at best play calls. And that ended that drive. It looked like they were going down the field for that game-winning score like they did against Toledo and Miami, Ohio. But the play calling, all of a sudden, it just abandoned them. They got real conservative. Were you surprised? It almost looked like Green Bay against the Bills 2 weeks ago, where the clock ran out, but they stuck with the running game to a major fault.
Yeah, with that Bills game, it carried over against the Jets, and they were taking that Rip Van Winkle 25-year nap. But all I know is the play calling in the second half was, I hate to say it, but it was god awful. The running game was getting stuck like the cork tightly sealed in the bottle, and they continued trying to beat that dead horse until they failed the 4th down and lost the game. I said this to you before we recorded, and I'll say this again. UB deserved to lose that game. End of story.
Absolutely. You know, they made too many mistakes, shot themselves in the foot, and you can't do that. And I don't know if it's apparent to you, Norm, but if you remember the Lance Leipold era when he was that coach, before he got those 2 bowl game victories, which I think are 2 of the biggest in football program history, before that, his teams, it seemed like if you look at the MAC championship game a few years back against Northern Illinois, where they had the big lead and couldn't hold on, they blew a game against Kent State where they had a big lead under Leipold. It seemed like when things went wrong to start off, Leipold could not get a hold of his team, and no matter what he did, you know, it was like a fish out of water. And I think we're seeing that outside of the second half against Toledo. Are we seeing that again with Coach Lindquist? Because you saw what happened against Holy Cross. It seemed like they had no answers when things were starting to get out of control. And tonight, that 3rd quarter, they got badly outscored, didn't have an answer. It seems like Lindquist now is going through that phase, and it seems like he might be regressing a little bit as head coach. What do you think?
Well, there is that old saying, and it does ring very true. History does repeat itself. And all I know is they got to learn, as in the UB Bulls, they've got to learn to play 60 minutes of hard-nosed football. Not 15, not 30, not 45. They got to play a full 60 minutes. From what I saw tonight, they played 30, and then they just kicked back at halftime, and it smacked them right across the face with a white glove.
Yeah, it really did seem like that game plan calling in the Tide, certainly after those 2 long touchdown runs, especially the one to open the second half, it really did turn the momentum of that game. And, you know, I almost wonder, not only do I think Central Michigan turned UB's formula in the first half around on them in the second half, I almost wonder if not only did UB get cocky after shutting down Finn and Toledo in the 4th quarter, but do you think Central Michigan may have saw what Ohio was able to do last week, and when they went to the halftime locker room, say, hey, wait a minute, let's go with this game plan. It worked for Ohio, because whatever adjustments they made seemed to work out well for the Chippewas.
Yeah, and the rule of thumb always when you're going over with your next opponent is always watch the prior film, and the prior game before tonight was UB playing the Ohio Bobcats, and they ran the ball mainly in the second half, and that was a big reason tonight why we saw Emmanuel taking the snaps mainly in the second half. Even though they've been using a 3 quarterback system, they mainly just used their main starter plus Emmanuel, and totaling it up from what I saw, Emmanuel had 280 or 290 rush yards. He wasn't quite at 300, but he gutted the Bulls like a fish.
He really did. I mean, you know, and that's what I love, the normisms to describe it perfectly. Yeah, I think for UB, this is if there's if there's one thing as far as a positive from this, as heartbreaking and as deflating of a loss as this is, use this as a lesson. They're still only one win away from bowl eligibility, and they've got two very winnable games at home, like tonight was. Don't mess around after the first half. Continue to put your foot on the gas. Like Harry Neal used to say, never take your foot off a poisonous snake. And UB was guilty of doing that tonight. And I think that in the next two games, you got Akron coming in, who I think is the worst team in the MAC, not just MAC East, in the MAC itself. And then you have Kent State after that, who beat Ohio. But other than that, hasn't been too impressive. I really think this could be a lesson for them. Don't mess around anymore. You get a big lead, you just continue to pour it on.
Yeah, you keep the foot on the neck until it snaps. And like you said with the snake, not only did they get bit, they probably got bit in the neck, one shot kill. And the catch with Kent State is in their game, they won 40-6. So it was, I would say, a semi-emphatic victory. So UB needs to take these next two games seriously. If they think this is going to be a cakewalk, they better think again.
That's absolutely right. Especially the one good thing, they're gonna have the home crowd behind them. Obviously, the last time they were at UB Stadium, we remember what happened, that thrilling second half against Toledo. And you kind of talk about this a lot, that as far as like feeding off the home crowd energy, you saw Central Michigan do it tonight. We saw Ohio do it last week. Do you think the fact that at least the last two games are at home, you think that could maybe provide a shot in the arm for this now struggling UB Bulls team?
Yeah, it would definitely be a booster shot, because this time for the final two games of the regular season, they've got their 12th man, so they don't got to worry about going on the road. They're right back in Buffalo, and should it all pan out together, there's no reason why UB can't get into a bowl game, even if it's at 7-5 or even a 6-6.
Absolutely. And another thing, I'm going to ask you to kind of play defensive coordinator here, Norm. When you watch the drive after UB kicked the field goal to go up 27-24, the game-winning drive for Central Michigan, that was a lot of quarterback runs. It didn't seem like Central Michigan did a whole lot fancy. Like, why do you think the issues came up defensively from what you saw? It seemed like Central Michigan kept going to the well at the same time, and it kept working. They never adjusted.
Well, you always want to keep running a play until the defense is able to stop it, and they were able to strike the black gold in the Texas tee with the running game. But defensively, UB should have had 7-8 defenders in the box to try and jam the run and contain Emmanuel, even blitz a safety or a linebacker, cut off those escape routes if he chooses to throw the ball. But Emmanuel only threw it 3 times, so it wasn't like he was going to take a 7-step drop. It was a quick snap and the RPO, the run pass option, and he was mainly keeping that ball himself, and he put the team on his back.
And here's the other thing that I would say, and while that is true, and I said to you, it was almost like the ghost of McElhenney out there, the former 49ers running back, well, I think the thing that's alarming to me, and this is where you got to give the Chippewas credit. Each time if you look at the first score of the game, what happened? They gave up a 60-yard return that set up the game-tying touchdown at that point. And then in the second half, UB gets that big field goal, go in the halftime locker room 24-7, which McNulty had an awesome game tonight. This loss was not on him. Wanted to throw
he
that
also
in
made
there.
a 54-yarder.
Yeah, I mean, give him an NFL contract like today.
Yeah, because in college level, making 50-yarders, it's not easy. And kickers in that level, they barely make 80% of their kicks. And the ones that do, they crash and burn in the NFL.
Yeah, and it's like Paul Peck says, right answer, McNulty was magnificent tonight. He was really good. Okay, bad pun aside, every time it seemed like UB was starting to gain the separation they needed. Central Michigan came out second half, big touchdown run. Every time they needed a response, they seemed to get one. And that kept them in the game until they were able to come back and ultimately win it.
Yeah, and UB had a chance to put the game on ice with a touchdown, even though hypothetically that could have possibly been overtime. One play after Snyder throws that interception, um,
Yeah.
Emmanuel coughs up the football, and we are near
Yeah.
Thanksgiving time, so it was kind of giving season down there in Michigan.
It really was. It really was. And and Sean Dolak was the one that was able to force it out. Damian Jackson recovered it. Dolak continues his monster pace. But if it wasn't for McNulty, I mean, he was tremendous tonight, and really Dolak was too. The rest of the defense, it's just they completely failed miserably, especially in that second half.
Yeah, and they looked like I said, they looked lackadaisical. It was kind of like the third period Eden Hall Warriors on D3, the Mighty Ducks. Relax, it's over, baby. And then they just fall apart like a house of cards.
Yeah, like Aaron Rodgers said, RELAX. But unfortunately, they came back to BITETHEM, come back to bite them.
Yeah, and the BOOTAY.
And now they end up getting the result which we don't want, which was an L.
Oh, yeah.
It's just really, I would have to say this could be right up there, probably worse than Holy Cross, and maybe one of the worst losses of Coach Mo's tenure here. And he was, when they brought him in, he's with the Dallas Cowboys. We heard about his defensive pedigree. That didn't show up tonight, especially in the second half.
No, it didn't. And you and I both know pretty much the Cowboys, since they won their last Super Bowl, they've been choke artists. So
Jerry World.
We might as well push someone into the fire.
Maybe now we know why they haven't won a Super Bowl since '95. but one thing, and then we'll get to the Bills a little bit. One more thing on this game, though, for UB. Now obviously 2 huge games coming up at home. Forget about the MAC East. UB could still win it, but now they need a miracle. They would need Ohio to lose both and UB to win both. I think UB can win both. I don't think Ohio's going to lose both. I think they'll lose next week, but I don't think they'll lose both. And so now it's really about getting that bowl eligibility locked up. If you're Coach Lindquist right now, what are you saying as hard as it's going to be to make the long drive back from Central Michigan, going 0-2 on the road trip? What are you saying to your guys on the bus ride home to get them fired up for the last 2 games?
It would just be simple for me. The last 2 games of the regular season are at home. Just got to regroup and focus. But if I was a head coach and on that bus ride back, none of my players would be saying a word. It would have to be absolute silence. Nothing. You blew a big lead. You don't deserve to have that, be able to say what you need to say,
Right. That's a good point. I think when they get ready for the next game in a few days, I think the point, as we said, you got 2 weaker teams coming in you should beat. Just get up for it, and when you get a lead, don't let them back in. I think that's pretty much where we have to leave it for UB after tonight's game.
Yeah, slam the door, lock the lock, and weld that sucker shut.
Indeed. All right, now let's get to the Bills. And I think even though UB lost tonight, I think it was kind of windy earlier, and I think that's because of the collective sigh of relief all of Western New York had when Josh Allen had found out was an elbow sprain and not a tear. A lot of us were preparing for the worst, being Bills fans. We can't help it.
Right.
It's in our DNA. But, his status is still up in the air against the Vikings game. But first, the fact that Allen's not going to be seriously hurt, now the Super Bowl hope's still alive. What a huge relief.
Yeah, it is. And again, he's only day-to-day. It's a sprain. If it was a tear, though, his year would be done. Probably
Agreed.
Tommy John surgery. That's 12 to 18-month recovery timetable. But worst case scenario, if he's not able to play against Minnesota, the backup quarterback would be tabbed to start. He is a former Viking. He played with Stephon Diggs. He threw the game-winning touchdown pass in the Miracle in Minneapolis. Case Keenum would be getting the start. He has been a bit of a journeyman, but he does have credible numbers. He took the Vikings to the NFC Championship game, even though the Eagles pecked the eyes off the Vikings in that one 38-7. But he is one of those guys you can plug in for a game or two and he can do well. But I do think Allen may be putting on that arm brace again and possibly play. But again, it's better to sit one game than possibly make the injury worse and sit out the rest of the season.
I would agree with that. As much consternation as I've had and we've had going back and forth on it throughout the week. Yes, I would agree as far as playing the Vikings go. Obviously Keenum was a great story when he was with the Minnesota Vikings and really took the league by storm. And I think the one good thing is if there is a positive to Josh Allen sitting out practice, at least Keenum's starting to learn the offense a little bit, which can only help, going into this game if Keenum has to play.
Yeah, and he took a lot of the first team reps. Allen was limited, and he did also start a couple of the preseason games. Yes, he kind of looked like poo on a shovel, but this is regular season now, and he's got to step it up big time if he is called upon. But if Allen feels he's all right, I do believe he will start. And this is not an easy Vikings team. They've won 6 games in a row, and Kirk Cousins, he's having another strong year, and his 2 big targets are Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. And they also picked up last week TJ Hawkinson near the trade deadline from Detroit.
Yeah, which I think was one of the shockers of the deadline, to be honest. And
yeah, Detroit's only offensive weapon, and they deal him off. Now they're going to go from a bajillion points to drinking dirt out of the well.
Yeah, well, you know what? That may not be true. Their defense gives up 1 trillion points. They're still going to give up 1 trillion points. It's just they won't score 1 trillion points anymore. It'll be like negative 1 trillion. But as far as the Bills go, everyone's saying, like, as far as, they're playing for the number 1 seed. They want to get that home playoff game if they have to play the dun Kansas City Chiefs again. And I certainly would agree with that. But Kansas City's schedule in the second is not a cakewalk, even with it being Patrick Mahomes and it being the Chiefs. It's not a cakewalk. They still have to play the Rams, who I know are inconsistent, but you still have to respect the fact that they're the defending champs. They got the Bengals. So they do have some tough games coming up. So even if the Bills should have to play Keenum this week and end up losing to the Vikings, I still think they're right in there. Although I will say if they do lose this weekend, they have to do everything they can to get Allen on the field for the Browns game, because you don't have much margin or room of error when you're talking about in a race with Kansas City.
Oh, yeah, and the game against Cleveland, the main guy they got to focus on is Nick Chubb. They're just basically handing the ball off, and besides that, Brissett's not, like, he's serviceable, but he's not elite. And personally, it is relief they're not going to be taking on Deshaun Watson, because otherwise, with Allen, should he not be playing that game, hypothetically, not saying that it won't happen, it could be a disaster like in 2008 when they started 5-1 and they lost 8 of their last 10.
The good news is we know that Allen should be back at latest. I would imagine, from what I'm hearing, the nightmare case scenario would be he misses the next 2 games. It doesn't sound like he would miss more than that. But at the same time, I think the more you can stop the bleeding, and yes, I agree. I think if Allen could do everything he can to be out there, I think he will. And a part of me still says he's going to play Sunday. But if I'm the Bills, now you got to take this good news you got on Allen and you got to run with it and do everything at least to get him out there for Cleveland. You don't want the bleeding to now spill into 6-4 and really start to have some worries, because this is a tough division this year.
Yeah, it is. And there's been multiple teams that started 6-2, 7-2 that failed to make the playoffs. And it's not the end of the world yet. We're only at the end of the season, but they want to be eating that nice cake and not crow. And all I can say about for the Bulls game in general is that was the exploding end of a Practical Joker's exploding cigar. It was a dud.
You know what? That's only you, Norm, can come up with that. That's yeah, I mean that's how
Registered
this
TM.
game feels. That's how this game feels. I mean, definitely. Just a couple more things on the Bills to close it up here. Obviously, in talking about that game against the Jets, yeah, it was very much like UB tonight. Made a ton of mistakes. They were very uncharacteristic. I think the slog that you saw in the second half against Green Bay carried over. At the
Yeah,
same time, you do have to give the Jets defense credit. I thought they played pretty well. I do think they missed the pass interference at the end of the game there. I definitely think that should have been a flag. But
I agree.
overall,
And
though,
if
you
that,
got to give the
sorry.
Jets credit for defense. However, they get the Dolphins and the Jets at home back-to-back weeks. I think those are going to be fun because the Bills, if they have Allen, are going to come out with fire in their eyes because they remember what these two teams just did to them.
Yeah, and the good thing is both losses were by a combined total of 5 points. And even though the Jets beat them, I'm still not convinced because they didn't play a good Bills team. They played a team that kicked it in neutral the whole game. And I still think it's JETS, just end the season.
Yeah, now I have an answer when everybody says BILLS, boy, I love losing Super Bowls. Well, now we can tell Jets fans just end the season. Or you know what else I like? JETS, suck, suck, suck. That's another
Well, here's one for
one.
New England as well to put in your pocket. Patriots. Patriots paying all the refs in order to succeed.
Nice. Norm, you topped me on that. You got it. Count it and the foul.
That's a 3-point play. Or no, that was like awesome. That was a 4-point play.
Absolutely a 4-point play. That's a 4-point play and a slam dunk to go along with it. So obviously, last thing, Bills, they're playing the Vikings. You kind of rattled off where they are in the NFL right now. Some keys to the game. Obviously, we don't know who's starting under center, whether it's Allen or Keenum. But what are some of the biggest keys that you see, besides who the starting quarterback is, to trying to finally end the Vikings streak, who, by the way, didn't look that great last week against Wentz and the Commanders? They needed a fourth quarter comeback to win that.
Oh, yeah. And besides the receiving core I was talking about, they should also jam that box every now and again because they do got James Cook's older brother, Dalvin Cook, who is a starting running back. And when he's healthy, he can turn it on into another turbo. And they're able to do that and also maybe mix in a little bump and run coverage with the receivers like Jefferson and Thielen. I can think even if Allen wasn't able to start and if Keenum can manage the game properly, I can see them going 7-2.
Yeah, no, I could certainly see it. Stranger things have happened. It's like you said, any given Sunday. So we'll see for the Bills. We'll see for the UB Bulls. I'll be at both the games, and I think we're going to have a great atmosphere. So come on, UB Bulls, Bullseye Nation. Your team needs you right now. Let's come out and show out against Akron and then Kent State. Norm, one last thing. Why don't you give our listeners and viewers again what's coming up on your next episode of your podcast?
It's going to be the high school playoffs going on at Highmark Stadium between Thursday and Friday night. Quick recap of the Bills game and even some hot take on Kyrie Irving and the conditions he has to be able to return to the Nets organization.
And guys, Bullseye Nation, I have listened to his podcast. It's a lot of fun. He really does a great job. Brianna, you enjoy his normisms on this program. He gives you a lot more of them and then some on his podcast. Guys, check it out. It really is terrific. Norm, we can't thank you enough for coming on again this week and hopefully next week. And I'm sorry to have to keep repeating this line, but hopefully next week, third time will be the charm, and we'll be talking about the Bulls clinching bowl eligibility, which they really should have done tonight.
But you know what, though, John? Better late than never. Goals Nation.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much, Norm, and we will talk to you again next week. Thank you for coming on. You're the best. Norm always gives us a hoot with some great things to say. Love those. We call them Normisms here on the UB Bulls and Bullseye Nation podcast of UB Bulls football. And he delivered again. He brought the energy. Now, as we move on here, let's take a tour around the MAC scoreboard. It was Eastern Michigan defeating UB's next opponent, the Akron Zips, 34-28. Ohio getting the 37-21 win against Miami of Ohio. So Ohio now sitting very pretty as they have a 2-game lead now over the UB Bulls. So again, very slim hopes of winning the MAC East. What a difference a couple of weeks make. We were talking about UB being one of the best teams in the MAC following their huge come-from-behind victory against Toledo, and now they find themselves 2 games back of the Bobcats with 2 to play. So UB really going to need a miracle to try to win the MAC East after that result last night. So Ohio gets the 37-21 win there against the Redhawks. It was Toledo beating Ball State 28-21. Northern Illinois hanging on in a nail-biter, 24-21 over Western Michigan. And Kent State, who UB will see to close out the season, picking up a very impressive 40-6 win down in Bowling Green against the Falcons. So again, it just shows these teams, this is why they call it MACtion. And Paul Peck had said a couple of weeks ago, UB was immune to it while they haven't been over the last 2 weeks. Anybody is capable of beating anybody on any given Saturday, and that's what we've seen. So UB has to take care of business. They have to finish when they get up on these teams. They didn't tonight against the Chippewas, and it cost them dearly. Now, as we look ahead to UB's next opponent, this is one of those teams that you got to jump on early and continue, and it's going to be the Akron Zips who come to town. Good news for UB, no more road games left this year, so if they can finish strong at home, that is where they'll lock up bowl eligibility. And for UB, it's going to be a 3:30 kickoff. And folks, this has not been pretty for Akron. 1-9 on the season. They've lost 9 consecutive games in a row. Their only win coming at the hands against an FCS school, St. Francis, beating them 30-23, and it took them overtime to do it. So again, an indication things certainly not going Akron's way. They then played number 14 Michigan State and number 15 Tennessee. They lost those games, get this, by a combined score of 115-6. That's right, 115-6. Think about that. Losing 52-0 and number 14 Michigan State, and then oh boy, getting to play number 15 Tennessee, losing there 63-6. And from there, it just got worse for the Zips. They lost to Liberty 21-12, and then they have lost to every MAC opponent that they have played so far this year. Now, they did play pretty well in this past loss against Eastern Michigan, 34-28, as we told you on the MAC scoreboard. But the reality is 1-9, you are what you are. This is not a good football team. And the UB Bulls, they need to come out angry. They need to come out with the passion that they played with in the first half tonight against Central Michigan and avoid the mental lapses and letdowns that ultimately led to this crushing, devastating 31-27 loss to the Central Michigan Chippewas. So can UB get back on the winning track? Can they lock up bowl eligibility, which they can do with the win in either of their final 2 games? Well, when we're going to know that answer is next week, and that is when we're going to speak with you next. So our next broadcast is going to be following that game against Akron. Again, that's going to be next Saturday. MACtion is done. We go back to Saturday football from here. And ultimately, I think I speak for a lot of Western New Yorkers when I say, thank goodness we're back to Saturday football. No more late midweek games. And UB didn't fare well in them. They went 0-2. So let's get back to the roll on Saturday afternoon. And so you certainly can do that by showing out in full force. And again, we will have complete coverage afterwards here on Bullseye Nation, the place to be for all your UB Bulls needs. And on that is going to wrap up this edition of Bullseye Nation. I am John Gruba. Thank you for tuning in. One more time, your final score tonight. Central Michigan pulling off the upset with a 31-27 win over your UB Bulls. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of your week. And as always, go UB Bulls go. They're at home the next 2 weeks. Let's get bowl eligible. Good night, everybody.